The Galactic Council had always viewed humanity as peculiarly passive, and Captain Jake Morrison knew this better than most as he stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Horizon, watching another human colony ship being turned away from the Zenthari trade hub. The massive vessel, carrying 3,000 colonists and their supplies, hung in the outer lanes like a forgotten toy, while sleek alien ships passed through the docking gates without even slowing down. This was the 4th time this month that human vessels had been denied basic services, and Jake felt the familiar burn of frustration in his chest. But he kept his face calm, because that was what humans did now. They smiled and they waited and they pretended that being treated like dirt was somehow acceptable because the alternative was worse, or so the diplomats kept saying. Ambassador Linda Hayes sat in her assigned seat at the Galactic Council chambers on the station orbiting Nexus Prime, and she listened to the Kravik representative laugh at her proposal for equal trade tariffs. The sound echoed through the vast chamber, and she saw other representatives hide their smiles behind their data pads as if the very idea of humans deserving equal treatment was some kind of joke. She had been doing this job for 7 years now, and every single session felt exactly like this one, with human concerns dismissed before the words even finished leaving her mouth. Linda smiled politely and made notes on her tablet, just like she always did, because losing her temper would only prove what they all believed anyway, that humans were too emotional and too primitive to deserve a real voice in galactic affairs. Across human space, the same patterns played out day after day and year after year, with the weight of it pressing down on every human who tried to make a life among the stars. Human merchants paid triple the standard fees at every port, and when they complained, they were told that their vessels required extra safety inspections, even though human ships had the best safety record in known space. Human explorers discovered new systems and mapped new routes only to watch those same systems declared off limits to human settlement a few months later when some elder species decided they wanted the resources for themselves. Human students with perfect scores were rejected from the prestigious academies, while alien students with barely passing grades were welcomed with open arms, and nobody ever quite explained why, except to say that humans needed more time to prove themselves. Worthy Commander Ryan Phillips guided his patrol ship, Liberty, through the asteroid field near the border worlds, and his crew worked with practiced efficiency to reach the Vexian transport that had sent out a distress signal an hour ago. The Vexian ship had suffered a complete engine failure and was drifting dangerously close to a cluster of massive asteroids that would tear the vessel apart if they made contact. Ryan had his people attach the towing cables, and they spent 6 hours carefully pulling the transport to safety through some of the most dangerous space in the sector. When they finally reached the safe zone and released the Vexian ship, the captain sent a message complaining about humans touching his vessel with their primitive equipment and threatening to file an official protest about the damage to his hull plating. Ryan read the message twice to make sure he understood it correctly, and then he filed his incident report and moved on, because there was always another crisis and another insult and another reason to prove that humanity deserved to exist among the stars. On Earth, the news feeds showed the same stories every day, with human colonies struggling under restrictions that seemed designed to make life as difficult as possible. New farms were declared environmental hazards and shut down. Medical facilities were cited for using unapproved procedures, even when those procedures saved lives. Schools were ordered to follow alien curricula that taught human children they came from an inferior species. The message was clear and it was constant, and it was grinding humanity down one regulation and one insult and one casual act of cruelty at a time. But out on the colony worlds, something was beginning to change in ways that the Galactic Council had not yet noticed. Helen Brooks stood in the administration building on New Dakota and read the evacuation order for the 3rd time, hoping that somehow the words would change or make sense, but they never did. Her colony had spent 20 years turning this harsh world into something beautiful, with farms that produced food for 6 systems and infrastructure that would support 1 million people within a generation. 15,000 colonists had worked and bled and died to build something worth having here, and now the Galactic Council had decided that the Etherian Collective wanted this planet instead, so humans had to leave. The order gave them 30 days to pack up and abandon everything they had built, and there was no compensation and no appeal and no recognition of the fact that this was theft on a massive scale. Helen sent an emergency transmission to Earth, but she already knew what the response would be, because it was always the same response. The diplomats would file a protest and the council would promise to review the matter, and months would pass before they announced that the Etherians had a stronger historical claim or some other nonsense that meant humans lost again. She looked out the window at the fields where colonists were harvesting grain, and she thought about all the families who would lose their homes, and she felt something shift inside her chest. It felt like a door closing and another door opening, and she realized that she was done asking for permission. She was done waiting for fairness. She was done pretending that patience would eventually be rewarded. Across human space, other colony directors and ship captains and ordinary people were reaching the same conclusion at roughly the same time. The teacher on Armstrong Colony who watched alien students mock her human pupils. The doctor on Titan Station who was denied access to medical supplies because humans were low priority. The engineer on the commercial transport who was paid half what his alien co-workers earned for the same work. The miner on the asteroid base who was passed over for promotion for the 15th time. Every single one of them felt that same shift, like a string pulled too tight, finally reaching its breaking point. The Galactic Council had mistaken patience for weakness, and they had mistaken tolerance for acceptance, and they had somehow convinced themselves that humans would endure anything rather than fight back. They had forgotten that humans came from a world that had tested them in every possible way, and that peaceful people are often the most dangerous when they finally decide they have had enough. The galaxy was about to learn this lesson, and it was going to be taught in a way that nobody would ever forget. The attack on the colony transport Mayflower happened on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything in ways that nobody could have predicted, but everyone should have seen coming. The unarmed vessel was carrying 800 colonists from Earth to a new settlement in the frontier sectors, and among those colonists were 200 children who had never seen anything but peace in their short lives. The ship was passing through neutral space under full transponder identification when 6 Draxian raider vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel and surrounded it like wolves circling prey. The Mayflower sent out a distress signal that reached 17 different stations and 4 different military outposts, but the closest help was 3 days away, and everyone knew that 3 days might as well be 3 years when raiders were involved. Captain Jake Morrison received the distress call on the horizon, and he felt something cold settle into his stomach as he read the details. The Draxians had taken the ship and they were demanding ransom, and they had already transmitted a video showing colonists in restraints to prove they meant business. Jake immediately sent a priority message to Earth Command requesting permission to respond, but he already knew what the answer would be, because he had been through this exact situation twice before. The Galactic Council had strict protocols about military action in neutral space, and humans were expected to follow those protocols, even when other species ignored them completely. Earth Command sent back the expected response, within an hour telling Jake to maintain position and wait for Council authorization before taking any action. Jake looked at that message for exactly 10 seconds before he deleted it and started giving orders to his crew. He opened secure channels to every human vessel within 20 light years, and he sent a simple message that said the time for waiting was over. The response came back faster than he expected, with 6 ships confirming they were changing course to rendezvous at his position, and not one of them asked for authorization, because they all understood that something fundamental had shifted. Commander Ryan Phillips brought the Liberty in first, and his face on the view screen showed the same cold determination that Jake felt burning in his own chest. They were done asking permission to save their own people. The planning took 8 hours because they only had one chance to get this right, and if they failed, then every human in the raider outpost would die. Jake knew the Draxians, and he knew how they operated, and he knew that they would kill hostages the moment they realized they were under attack. The 7 human ships worked out an approach vector that would bring them in from the blind side of the outpost, and they synchronized our faster-than-light drives to arrive at exactly the same moment. Ryan suggested using electronic warfare to blind the radar sensors, and Lieutenant Steve Hayes from the Tactical Division proposed a boarding strategy that would hit 3 points simultaneously. To divide the defender response, they dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly on schedule, and the Draxian outpost had maybe 5 seconds of warning before human ships were on top of them, like a hammer coming down on glass. Jake opened a direct channel to the raider commander and gave him one chance to surrender peacefully and release all hostages unharmed. The Draxian laughed, and then he killed 3 hostages right there on the video feed, just to show that he was serious about not being intimidated by primitive humans. Jake closed the channel and gave the order that everyone had been waiting for. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations as an example of perfect tactical execution combined with absolute ruthless efficiency. Human Marines breached the outpost at 3 locations simultaneously using cutting charges that the Draxians never saw coming. The raiders tried to fall back to defensive positions, but human soldiers were already there waiting for them, because someone had hacked their security systems and knew exactly where everyone was located. The Draxian commander tried to activate the explosive charges they had planted throughout the hostage area, but found that the detonators had been disabled remotely about 3 minutes before the assault began. The entire operation from first breach to final all clear took 17 minutes, and when it was over, every single colonist was recovered alive while every single raider was either dead or in custody. Jake stood on the bridge of the horizon and opened a channel directly to the Galactic Council headquarters. On Nexus Prime, he knew that what he said next would either change everything or end his career, but he found that he did not care about his career anymore. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of 70 years of accumulated frustration and disrespect, and he spoke in a voice that was steady and clear and absolutely final. He told them that humanity had recovered their people, and that the raiders no longer existed, and that human forces were withdrawing to human space. He told them that humanity would no longer wait for council justice when human lives were at stake, and he told them that the age of asking permission was over. Then he closed the channel before anyone could respond because he was done listening to speeches about protocols and procedures from people who had never cared about human safety. On Earth, the news spread faster than light itself could travel, because every human ship and every human station and every human colony received the transmission simultaneously. Ambassador Linda Hayes was in her apartment preparing for another pointless council session when her secure communicator started buzzing with emergency alerts. She watched the recording of Jake Morrison 3 times and then she started crying. Not because she was sad, but because she felt something that humans had not felt in 3 generations. She felt hope mixed with pride and vindication, and the absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The Galactic Council summoned her within an hour, and she arrived at the council chambers to find complete chaos waiting for her. The Kravik delegate who had mocked her so many times was standing in the center of the floor, demanding that humanity be sanctioned immediately for unauthorized military action. The Vexian representative was calling for Earth to be expelled from the council. The Etherian ambassador was demanding that Jake Morrison be arrested and tried for violating neutral space agreements. Linda Hayes stood at the entrance and listened to them shout for 10 minutes while she thought about everything that humanity had endured, and everything they had sacrificed and everything they had tried to be. Then she walked down to the speaking platform, and something in the way she moved made the entire chamber fall silent. She looked at each representative in turn, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the vast space with absolute clarity and absolute conviction. She told them that humanity had followed their rules for 70 years, and accepted their restrictions and endured their mockery and their discrimination and their casual cruelty. She told them that humans had done this because they believed in the promise of a civilized galactic community, where all species worked together in peace and mutual respect. She paused and let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, and then she delivered the words that would echo through history. She told them that humanity's patience was over, and that humans would no longer accept second-class status or watch their people suffer while the council debated and delayed. She told them that the galaxy was about to learn what happened when peaceful people finally decided they had endured enough. The Kravik delegate tried to interrupt, but Linda simply turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, every human representative in the council chambers stood and followed her out in complete silence while the alien delegates watched in shock. The withdrawal of human cooperation happened simultaneously across 1,000 worlds, and it caught the Galactic Council completely unprepared because they had never imagined that humans would actually unite and act together with such perfect coordination. Every human merchant and scientist and engineer and diplomat received the same encrypted message at exactly the same moment, and the message was simple enough that nobody could misunderstand it. Come home. The message was signed by Admiral Peter Grant, who commanded All human military forces and President Claire Murphy, who had just declared a state of emergency back on Earth. Within 6 hours, human vessels across the galaxy were turning toward home, and within 12 hours, the first effects were being felt in ways that made alien governments realize how much they had taken humanity for granted. Commander Ryan Phillips was pulling security duty near the Zenthari shipyards when his orders came through, and his first reaction was relief so profound that it made his hands shake on the controls. He had spent 5 years patrolling alien space and protecting alien interests and being treated like a second-class citizen every single day of those 5 years. The Liberty turned toward Earth alongside every other human vessel in the sector, and Ryan watched his sensors as ship after ship joined the exodus. There were dozens of them at first, and then hundreds, and then thousands, as every human in alien space decided that enough was finally enough. His second reaction after the relief faded was concern about what would come next, because he knew that the galaxy would not accept this quietly, and he knew that humanity was about to face challenges that would make the past 70 years look easy. The Galactic Council discovered very quickly what they had been taking for granted all this time. Human technology had become integral to modern infrastructure in ways that nobody had really noticed because it had happened so gradually over 3 generations. Human engineers maintained critical systems on stations across the galaxy. Human medical knowledge had saved billions of alien lives through advances that humans had shared freely. Human agricultural techniques fed entire sectors with crop yields that had seemed impossible before humans showed up. Human navigation systems made faster than light travel safer and more efficient. Human power generation designs kept stations running at peak efficiency. And now all of that knowledge and all of that expertise was being withdrawn simultaneously, while the aliens who had benefited from it could only watch in growing horror. On the trade station Nexus Prime, the chief engineer, Greg Palmer, began the systematic shutdown of the enhanced power grid that he had designed and maintained for 5 years. The station administrator, who was a Vexian named Thex, came running into the engineering section, demanding that Greg remain at his post and continue his work. Greg looked at him with an expression that made Thex actually take a step backward, and then Greg spoke in a voice that was very calm and very final. He told Thex that he had been paid 70% of standard wages for 5 years, while doing work that nobody else on the station could do. He told him that he had worked double shifts and triple shifts because Thex had refused to hire adequate staff. He told him that he had been called primitive to his face by people whose systems he kept running every single day. And then he told Thex that he was done, and that Thex should find someone else to maintain his precious power grid. Greg walked away, and across the station, 17 other human engineers did exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. Within a week, the power output on Nexus Prime had dropped by 40%, and emergency rationing had to be implemented. Within 2 weeks, the environmental systems started failing in the outer sections. Within a month, the station administrator was sending increasingly desperate messages to Earth Command, begging for someone to come back and fix the systems before people started dying. Nobody from Earth responded to any of those messages. The pattern repeated itself on every major station and on colony, worlds, and in research facilities and in hospitals across the galaxy. Dr. Amy Chen, who had developed the cure for Yandari plague and shared it freely with every species that needed it, packed up her research and boarded a transport headed for Earth. The Yandari Council sent messages every day begging her to reconsider and offering her anything she wanted if she would just stay and continue her work. Amy deleted every message without reading it, because she had spent 15 years giving everything she had to people who treated her like she should be grateful for the opportunity to serve them. She was done being grateful for scraps. On Earth, the consolidation was already well underway, and President Claire Murphy stood before cameras broadcasting to every human settlement in known space. She told them that humanity had tried for 3 generations to earn respect through service and cooperation and patience. She told them that you cannot earn what others refuse to give, and that the time for asking permission was over. She told them that humanity would build its own future and protect its own people, and show the galaxy what humans could achieve when they stopped pretending that being nice would somehow make aliens treat them better. The speech was short and direct, and when it ended, there was not a single human anywhere who did not understand that everything had changed. Forever, Admiral Peter Grant stood in the command center on Armstrong Station orbiting Luna and looked at the holographic display showing human territory. New defense stations were being constructed at every border point, and old weapon systems that had been mothballed to avoid alarming alien neighbors were being brought back online. Ships that had been in storage for decades were being refitted with new technology that humanity had developed but never deployed because the Galactic Council had asked them not to. Peter looked at his senior officers and told them something that everyone in the room already knew. He told them that humanity was not going to war, but that humanity would never again be vulnerable to attack. He told them that they were going to build a force that made any thought of attacking humanity completely unthinkable. He told them that they were going to establish borders that humanity controlled and defended without asking anyone for permission. Captain Jake Morrison was promoted to Commodore and given command of the new rapid response fleet that would answer distress calls from any human ship anywhere in the galaxy. His orders were crystal clear and left no room for interpretation. Any human vessel in distress would receive immediate assistance without waiting for council approval. Any human colony under threat would be defended with overwhelming force. Any attack on human citizens would be met with instant retaliation. Jake read his orders 3 times, and then he looked at his new command staff and saw the same fierce determination in their eyes that he felt in his own chest. They were done being victims, and they were done apologizing for defending their own people. The galaxy was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between patience and weakness. The Galactic Council had assumed that humans were passive by nature, when in reality humans had simply been choosing peace over conflict. They had assumed that human tolerance meant acceptance when in reality it had meant restraint. They had assumed that they could push humanity around forever, because humans had never pushed back. All of those assumptions were about to be proven catastrophically wrong, and the consequences would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. Onto the borders of human space, new defense platforms were going active every single day, and the technology they displayed made alien military observers send worried reports back to their governments. Weapons systems that seemed to come from nowhere. Sensor networks that could detect ships at ranges that should have been impossible. Shield generators that produced fields stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. And the ships kept coming out of Earth's orbital shipyards in numbers that suggested humans had been building in secret for years. They had been building and preparing and waiting for the moment when patience finally ran out and action became necessary. The age of human patience was over, and the age of human power was beginning, and the galaxy was about to discover what 3 generations of peaceful humans could accomplish when they finally decided to stop asking for permission and start taking what they deserved. The Kravik Dominion made the fatal mistake of testing humanity's resolve exactly 4 months after humans had withdrawn from the Galactic Council and begun fortifying their own territory. The Kravik had one of the largest military forces in known space, and they had conquered 17 species over the past 2 centuries, using tactics that had been refined through constant warfare. Their fleet commanders looked at the human withdrawal as weakness, and their political leaders saw an opportunity to teach the upstart humans a lesson about respecting their betters. They chose the human colony of New Terra as their target because it was prosperous and well-developed, and taking it would force humanity back to the negotiating table on Kravik terms. They calculated that Earth's forces were still organizing and unprepared for a major conflict. They were wrong in ways that would cost them half their fleet. The Battle of New Terra began when 300 Kravik warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately began broadcasting demands for the colony's surrender. The Kravik commander gave the humans 1 hour to evacuate the planet and abandon all infrastructure and equipment. Commodore Jake Morrison was in command of the defense fleet orbiting New Terra, and he listened to the Kravik demands without saying a word. When the hour was up, the Kravik commander sent another message asking if humanity was ready to be reasonable. Jake's response was to launch every fighter and activate every defense platform and send a single word back to the Kravik fleet: no. The battle that followed lasted 6 hours, and military historians would study it for decades, trying to understand how human forces that were outnumbered 3-1 managed to achieve such a complete and devastating victory. The Kravik had battle plans that had worked perfectly for 200 years against species that fought according to the accepted rules of galactic warfare. They expected human ships to form defensive lines and engage in direct combat, where superior numbers would eventually win. Instead, human vessels scattered in what looked like complete chaos, and the Kravik commanders smiled because they thought the humans were panicking. They did not realize they were watching a carefully coordinated strategy until it was far too late. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random until suddenly they converged from 6 different directions on a single Kravik battle group and tore it apart in 90 seconds before scattering again. Weapons fire came from angles that should have been impossible because human fighters were using the planet's gravity well to slingshot themselves into attack positions that no sane pilot would attempt. Electronic warfare systems that humanity had developed but never used in combat suddenly activated and blinded Kravik sensors across the entire fleet. The Kravik tried to adapt, but every time they adjusted their formation, the humans hit them from a new direction with tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. Admiral Peter Grant had designed this strategy over months of careful planning, and he had based it on one simple principle that the Kravik had forgotten. Humans came from a world where they had spent thousands of years fighting each other with ever more creative and deadly tactics. Humanity knew more about warfare than species that had been conquering their neighbors for centuries, because humans had been perfecting the art of killing each other since they learned to pick up rocks. Every human ship captain had studied battles from Earth's history and learned lessons written in blood across 1,000 years of human conflict. The Kravik were about to get a very expensive education in why peaceful species are often the most dangerous. The turning point came when the Kravik attempted their traditional overwhelming assault, where they concentrated their entire remaining fleet for one massive strike against the human defensive positions. It was the same tactic that had worked against every other species they had ever fought. Admiral Peter Grant had been waiting for this moment and had prepared for it specifically. The human ships fell back in what looked like a retreat, and the Kravik fleet surged forward in pursuit, thinking they had finally broken the human defense. Then they flew directly into a trap that had been set up the moment the battle began. The space around New Terra erupted with weapons fire from platforms that had been silent and invisible until that exact moment. Mines that had been deployed in carefully calculated patterns detonated in sequence, creating a wave of destruction that tore through the Kravik formation. Human ships that had been retreating suddenly reversed course and attacked from behind, while fresh squadrons that had been hiding in the planet's shadow came up from below. The Kravik fleet that had been hunting what they thought was prey suddenly found themselves surrounded and being systematically destroyed by forces they had not even known were there. Lieutenant Commander Steve Hayes sat at his tactical station on the horizon and watched the enemy formation dissolve in real time on his displays. The Kravik were trying to retreat, but human ships were already blocking every escape route and picking off stragglers with ruthless efficiency. Steve reported to Jake that the enemy was attempting to withdraw and asking for terms. Jake's response was cold and final. He told Steve to let the damaged vessels go, but to destroy any ship that fired another shot. Then he told Steve to broadcast a message to the Kravik commander on all frequencies so T had everyone in the system could hear it. Jake's message was short and direct and left no room for misunderstanding. He told the Kravik commander to take his remaining ships home and tell his government that New Terra was off limits. He told him that every human world was off limits. He told him that the age of pushing humanity around was over, and that any future attacks on human territory would be met with overwhelming force and total destruction. He told him that humanity had been patient for 3 generations, but that patience was not weakness and tolerance was not surrender. Then he cut the transmission and watched as half the Kravik fleet limped away toward home while the other half stayed behind as debris and wreckage, and a very clear warning to anyone else who thought humans were easy targets. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within hours of receiving news about the battle, and Ambassador Linda Hayes received their urgent summons demanding her immediate presence. She was back on Earth and had been for months, and she looked at the summons for about 5 seconds before deleting it. Instead, she sent a junior diplomat named Paul Martinez with a recorded message from President Claire Murphy. Paul arrived at the council chambers and played the message without any introduction or explanation, and then he left before anyone could ask questions. President Murphy's face appeared on every display in the chamber, and her expression was calm, but her eyes were hard as diamond. She told the council that they had failed to protect human interest for 3 generations. She told them that they had failed to enforce their own laws when humans were the victims. She told them that they had enabled discrimination and theft and violence against human people, while demanding that humans show restraint. She told them that humanity was withdrawing its membership from the Council permanently. She told them that Earth would establish its own territories and defend its own people, and forge its own path forward. She told them that they were welcome to establish diplomatic relations with humanity on equal terms, but that humans were no longer interested in being anyone's subordinates or second-class citizens. The message ended, and the Council chambers erupted in chaos with representatives shouting and demanding responses and threatening sanctions. But there was no human left in the building to hear them because Paul had already boarded his shuttle and departed for Earth. The Galactic Council could shout at empty air all they wanted, but humanity was done listening to speeches from people who had never cared about human welfare. On the borders of human space, construction continued at a pace that shocked every military analyst who studied the reports. Defense stations appeared seemingly overnight, equipped with technology that made the Kravik fleet look primitive by comparison. Sensor networks mapped entire sectors in detail that the Council's best systems could not match. Weapons platforms that could track and destroy targets at ranges that should have been impossible. And the ships kept coming with new designs and new capabilities that suggested humanity had been holding back for decades. They had been holding back, and now the restraints were off, and the galaxy was seeing what humans could build when they stopped asking permission and started building what they needed. The news of the Battle of New Terra spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, and every species that had dismissed humanity as primitive and weak suddenly found themselves reevaluating that assessment. The Kravik Dominion that had seemed invincible just days ago had lost half its fleet to a human force, 1/3 its size. The message was clear and impossible to ignore. Humanity was not weak, and humanity was not passive, and humanity was definitely not going to tolerate being pushed around anymore. The age of taking advantage of human patience was over, and the age of treating humanity with respect had begun, whether the galaxy liked it or not. 2 years after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the balance of power in known space had fundamentally shifted in ways that nobody could have predicted when this all began. Human space now encompassed 67 settled worlds and twice as many resource operations scattered across sectors that humanity had claimed and fortified. The Earth Defense Forces had become the most technologically advanced military in the galaxy, and more importantly, the most willing to actually use that technology when human interests were threatened. For the first time since humans had reached for the stars, their people were truly prospering without constant interference and discrimination from species that had once treated them like unwanted children. Admiral Peter Grant stood in the command center on Armstrong Station and looked at the holographic display that showed human territory stretching across vast reaches of space. The territory had tripled in size over 2 years through a combination of colonization and treaties with smaller species that had also suffered under Council dominance. Every human colony was thriving now, without the burden of triple fees and arbitrary restrictions. Trade flowed freely between human worlds. Resources were developed for human benefit. And most importantly, human citizens could live their lives without fear of being treated as inferior by arrogant aliens who thought age meant superiority. A Galactic Council delegation had been requesting a meeting for 6 months, and Peter had made them wait because humanity operated on human schedules now. When he finally agreed to meet them, the delegation included representatives from every major power, including the Kravik who had learned their lesson at New Terra. They arrived on Armstrong Station with all the pomp and ceremony they thought their positions deserved. But Peter kept them waiting in the diplomatic suite for 3 hours before he bothered to show up. When he finally entered the room, his uniform was crisp and his expression was completely neutral, and he sat down without offering any of the traditional greetings that Council protocol demanded. The Kravik delegate, whose name was War Leader Thren, spoke first because the Kravik always assumed they should speak first. He told Admiral Grant that the Council wished to discuss terms for humanity's return to the galactic community. Peter looked at him for a long moment, and then he smiled without any warmth reaching his eyes. He told Thren that humanity had absolutely no interest in returning to a body that had treated humans as second-class citizens for 3 generations. He told him that humanity had moved on and built something better, and that the Council's approval was no longer required or desired. Ambassador Linda Hayes sat Beside Peter, and she had been named Secretary of State in the new human government after her years of service trying to make the council listen to human concerns. She leaned forward and told the delegation that humanity was willing to establish bilateral relations with species that showed proper respect. She told them that Earth would consider trade agreements and defense pacts and cultural exchanges, but only on equal terms where human interests were treated with the same importance as alien interests. She told them that the age of humans begging for scraps was over, and that any future relationship would be based on mutual benefit and mutual respect. The Vexian representative, whose species had been particularly dismissive of humans over the years, interrupted to say that humanity could not simply claim territory and expect recognition. He said there were protocols and procedures that had to be followed. Linda's expression hardened, and she told him that those were the same protocols that had somehow never protected human interests when it mattered. She told him that those were the same procedures that had been used to justify stealing human colonies and denying human rights. She told him that humanity was done with protocols that only seemed to apply when they hurt human interests. She told him that human territories were established and defended and recognized by the species that actually mattered, and that whether the Council accepted this reality was completely irrelevant to human planning. Over the next 3 hours, the reality of the new galactic order became clear to the delegation. Humanity had built alliances with dozens of smaller species who had also suffered under Council dominance. The Zenthari shipbuilders had signed an exclusive trade deal with Earth after their infrastructure collapsed without human engineers. The Yandari, who desperately needed access to human medical research, had become humanity's closest allies and trading partners. The Torvian miners, who had been exploited by the Council for centuries, now worked with human corporations on fair terms. A new power block was forming in the galaxy, and humanity was at its center, and the old Council powers were discovering that their authority only extended as far as species were willing to accept it. Commodore Jake Morrison now held the rank of Admiral and was responsible for training the next generation of fleet commanders at the new military academy on Mars. He taught a doctrine that was simple and direct, and based on hard lessons learned over 3 generations of human experience in space. He told his students that humanity did not seek war, but would never hesitate to defend human people and human interests. He told them that humanity did not seek domination, but would never again accept subjugation from anyone. He told them they were the guardians of a species that had learned patience the hard way, and had finally learned that peaceful does not mean helpless and tolerant does not mean weak. On New Dakota, the colony that had nearly been stolen by the Itharian Collective was thriving under the leadership of Governor Helen Brooks. The Itharians had tried to enforce their claim by sending a fleet to intimidate the colonists, but they had encountered Jake Morrison's rapid response group instead. The Itharian fleet had quietly withdrawn after a short conversation about what happened to the Kravik at New Terra. New Dakota was human territory now, and Helen stood at the dedication ceremony for the planet's new capital city, watching 15,000 colonists celebrate their freedom from alien interference. Dr. Amy Chen had returned to her research, but now she worked exclusively for human benefit and published through Earth's new scientific consortium. Her latest breakthrough in regenerative medicine was shared freely with allied species and available for purchase by others at fair market rates. The Galactic Council's research institutes that had once received human knowledge as tribute now had to compete and pay and show respect if they wanted access. Amy had refused 3 delegations from the Yandari Council before finally agreeing to meet them, and when she did, she made her terms very clear. She told them she had spent 15 years sharing her work freely and receiving condescension in return. She told them that her research now served humanity first, and that if they wanted access, they would pay market rates and show proper respect, and accept that humans were equals, not servants. Captain Ryan Phillips had been promoted again, and now commanded a joint task force that included ships from Earth and the Zenthari and the Yandari. They were hunting pirate groups that had terrorized the frontier sectors for years because the Council had never cared enough to stop them. The pirates had learned very quickly that human-led forces did not follow the old rules that had made piracy profitable. Humans did not negotiate with pirates. Humans did not accept bribes. Humans did not worry about political considerations when eliminating threats to civilian shipping. The pirates either surrendered immediately or they died, and word spread fast that the frontier was no longer a safe place for criminals. Piracy in human-allied space dropped by 80% within a year, and merchant traffic increased by 200% as ships that had avoided the region for decades suddenly found it safe to operate there. The economic benefits flowed to every species in the Alliance, and suddenly planets that had been ignored by the Council were prospering under human protection. President Claire Murphy addressed the Assembly of Human Worlds in a speech that was broadcast to every human settlement and every allied species. She told them that humanity's ancestors had dreamed of a united galaxy where all species worked together in peace and equality. She told them that dream had been betrayed by species that saw humans as inferior and convenient to exploit. She told them that humanity had built something better based on genuine partnership and mutual respect and the fundamental principle that strength should protect weakness, not exploit it. She paused and looked out at the representatives from 67 worlds and dozens of allied species. She told them that no species would ever forget the moment humanity's patience finally snapped, not because humans became conquerors or tyrants, but because humans showed the galaxy what happened when peaceful people were pushed too far. She told them that humanity had not become monsters but had instead become what they always should have been, a people who demanded respect and protected their own and stood as equals among the stars. The assembly erupted in applause that lasted for 5 minutes, and across human space the message was received and understood. The Galactic Council eventually recognized human territories because they had no choice. The species that had once dismissed humanity now courted Earth's favor and competed for human attention. Trade agreements were renegotiated on equal terms. The insults stopped. The discrimination ended. Not because the galaxy suddenly developed ethics, but because humanity had finally taught them that respect must be earned through strength, and that patience is a gift that should never be mistaken for weakness. The age of human patience was over, and the age of human power had truly begun.